What I realized is the phrase that I like to use is nobody wanted to give me a seat at the table. So I not only had to build my own seat, I had to build my own table too.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Confessions of a B2B Entrepreneur. My name is Tom, your host, and today we have Nick McLean, who is one of the partners of Four Pillars Investors, which is a PE firm that buys companies between $20 and $100 million in revenue. And so I got Nick on because I'm kind of investigating this world at the moment, looking to buy some add-on companies for fame. And so I got super interested in how you analyze companies, how you find companies, what you do during the handover period, and then what you do to improve them. And so we had Nick on and he basically explains how he does this Four Pillars Investors. So it's super valuable for me. I think it's going to be super valuable for you. Of course, thanks to Fame, Nick is actually a client of Fame, which is how I found him. Then I've been reading the content we've been producing for him and have seen he's clearly very knowledgeable. So shout out to Fame for sourcing this guest and for producing this show. If you'd like a show like this, go to fame.so. Now let's jump into this discussion with Nick now. Okay, team, we've got to give a quick shout out to Hrefs, who are now sponsoring the show. Now, I've been using them for roughly 10 years, and they've actually just come out with a feature that is changing the game for how we're doing SEO at Fame. Essentially, once you've added their code to your site, what you can now do is track the changes that are being made on your site, and then also obviously track that against the traffic changes. And so you can essentially see if you change or update this blog post, let's say, you can see if you are getting a boost in traffic from that. But the kicker is you can't just do that on your own site. You can also do that on a competitor's site. So you can literally see the changes your competitor is making and then match that to increased or decreased traffic. So you can learn from what they're doing to boost your own traffic. In addition to that, they just introduced a new entry-level plan. The top plan used to be, I think it used to be $99, but now you can get the starter plan at $29, which gets you this feature and about 57 other features that they have in the tool. So I highly recommend going to check that out. Either Google Hrefs and find the starter plan or click the link in the show notes below. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I want to start with numbers because the more time I spend in the CEO role, the more I realize how important it is to understand accounting and finance. And that seems to me to be a strong area for you. And so I'd love to find out how you learn to get good at the numbers.
Well, I don't want to say that I've learned to get good at the numbers. I think there are a few things that you can talk about here, though. And first, you mentioned it in your question. You said understand. That by far is the most important part, is to just understand the numbers. So often I talk to business owners and whatnot. They say, well, our numbers are always good. We're very consistent, stable. And then you look at the numbers and they're all over the board. And that just screams to me that no, they don't really understand the numbers, because if they did understand the numbers, then they wouldn't try and say that it's stable. As you look at your own business, though, what I would encourage you to think about as you're trying to better analyze your own company's performance and whatnot is really to take the mindset that you are in control of your company's performance. And if something happens positive or negative, you need to figure out why it did that, positive or negative, and then try to control for that, try to improve or try to increase the occurrence of that. If it's a good thing, try to mitigate it if it's a bad thing, and go from there. Obviously, we cannot control everything that happens to our business. That's silly to think that we can. However, you don't want to play the victim and think that your business is not yours to control, because at the end of the day, it is. You, just like in sports or life in general, a lot of things are outside of our control. You've got to overcome those in order to have a successful business.
Totally makes sense. Makes you feel a bit better about it. But if we look at your work history, I studied it this morning, and you spent a big chunk of time at this kind of boutique investment bank, where I assume you were just reviewing numbers of businesses every day. Would you say that's where you learned the most?
That's certainly part of what I like, for sure. Analyzing the numbers, uncovering the trends, because so often you'll be pitched certain numbers and they'll tell you what story they want you to hear. However, it's your job to figure out if that's really the story that those numbers are trying to tell. Really, though, I think it starts a little bit earlier than that. Where this analysis really came from was an internship I had in college, or I guess university, as you folks over there like to call it. It was a super boring job, and I was literally looking for things to do so that I was not so bored. And one of those tasks that I found was something I could do within Excel, Microsoft Excel. Through that program, I really just immersed myself in it, tried to learn as much as I could, and felt like I got pretty proficient. Then, whenever I took a class in college about investments and whatnot, it really married the two, the understanding of how Microsoft Excel works with all the analysis and whatnot that you need to do for investments and whatnot. And that's really where my desire or interest in analyzing numbers, looking at companies from that perspective, where it was born from.
Such a good way of putting the whole analyzing a business, if you're trying to buy it or I guess sell it, is understanding, if you're buying, understanding the story that is trying to be told, and then you try and validate that by looking at the numbers. It's actually something that I've been thinking a lot about recently, that if you're trying to, I think what finance professionals do really well is they can take the numbers of the business and then the whole story of the business and then not massage, but present the numbers in a way that help tell a story. But would you say that's the big part of the value, like an investment banker or a financial advisor can help you with a company?
Absolutely, they can, for sure. Again, we're often, as you think about most business owners are not running a successful business because they are experts at analyzing financial statements. Don't get me wrong, that's an important skill to have. It's certainly critical for someone in your organization to have. But if you look at the success story of most entrepreneurs, I can't say that most of their success is because they're able to open up Excel and slice and dice a financial model 6 ways to Sunday. They had a vision for their company. They saw a hole in the marketplace in terms of a product or a service that wasn't out there that people needed. And they found a way to create that in a way that people were raising their hands in order to give their company money. That's a lot different skill set than pulling all the information out of your accounting software and putting it into Excel and geeking out over the numbers and whatnot. So one thing that I talk a lot about sometimes with various folks is how the skill set of a CEO changes over time. In the beginning, it has to be a big part about business development, about refining your product and service. Over time, though, it skews more towards having a better understanding of finance and accounting and whatnot. Going back to your question, though, a lot of times businesses sell before the owner has to make that transition. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's perfectly natural. And that's why a good investment banker or a good financial advisor, even just a good accountant, can be critical in that process to help you better understand how to tell your amazing story through the financial statements.
Maybe a strange question, but do you get that spike of adrenaline or dopamine when you're finally sent the P&L for a company that you're looking at buying and you're excited about diving in?
I would say it's maybe a little bit more trepidation when I first get the P&L. I would say after I've had a chance to analyze it and the numbers are telling me the same story that I'm hearing from the business owner, that probably is when I get more of that spike than anything else. Because as well as I do, a lot of business owners are good salespeople. And if they can't sell you on their business being good, then they're probably not going to be able to sell you their products to all their customers and whatnot. So I get sold a false bill of goods all sorts of times. And it's not until you see the financials that you realize that. So that's why I would say the dopamine hit probably occurs a little bit later, because it's the whole trust but verify concept at play right there.
Trepidation. Yes, that's a good way. Maybe I'll get to that point. Right now, I'm still excited. Let's dig into 4 Pillars Investors then. I want to understand what the thesis is actually, and then we'll dig into more your role and the current portfolio.
Well, you might be aware of my background just through the work that we've done together, but I tried to get into private equity and I was never successful. I tried really hard and did everything that I thought you had to do. And you know what? Those doors never open. So what I realized is, the phrase that I like to use is, nobody wanted to give me a seat at the table. So I not only had to build my own seat, I had to build my own table too. And what I realized is that if traditional private equity doesn't want somebody like me who's perhaps non-traditional or unconventional, then I would be a little bit foolish to try and build a private equity firm that mimics all those other firms that didn't want me in the first place. And so as I thought about how to set up the organization, how we would be different, what I realized is that I'm an entrepreneur at heart and I like working with other entrepreneurs. And it sure seems like if you're selling your business, that you would prefer to work with somebody else that has been in the same trenches that you have, or at least similar trenches, as opposed to somebody that's, not trying to be disrespectful or condescending or whatever to those other folks, but to folks that all they've done is really analyze companies from the ivory tower, from the financial model, as opposed to figuring out how you're going to make payroll whenever cash is tight, figuring out what you're going to do whenever a customer calls you up and says, "Hey, Nick, we're really thinking about moving our business from your firm to another firm." You can't get the experience of dealing with those types of issues whenever you're only at the board level, only interacting with the company president or whatever weekly or bi-monthly. You got to be in the trenches. And I feel like that's a real big distinguishing factor as to how we view acquisitions differently than conventional private equity firms.
Makes total sense. And so I understand that the range of revenue that you guys, I think it's 5 to 20 million, or the 5 to 100.
No, I mean, I would say the revenue probably starts at about 20 million and we'll go a little bit smaller, but we're probably not the ideal buyer for companies of much less than, I would say, 10 million. 10 to 20 million is a little on the small side, but 20 million and up is really where we feel like we can be most successful.
And where do we get the cash to buy these companies?
That's a good question. So we're actually what's called an independent sponsor. So we raise capital on a deal-by-deal basis, as opposed to having a pool of committed capital. Where the capital comes from on each deal, it comes from a variety of, or it could come from a variety of sources, high net worth individuals, it could come from family offices. But actually, there are some private equity firms out there that only work with independent sponsors like Four Pillars. So they realize that there are people out there doing it a little bit differently. They like that approach and they seek us out to try and work with us because they like our approach.
And how are we sourcing the deals?
Oh, good question. This is one question that, well, let me step back. A lot of times people will say, how'd you start your business? How'd you do this? How'd you do that? And they're really asking because of pure curiosity. It's just interesting to them. When you ask about sourcing deals, yes, there's a little bit of, curiosity or whatever at play, but really the question is coming from, they want to know because nobody has a perfect answer to this. Nobody has it figured out. It's part art, it's part science. And my firm belief is that you have to do it yourself for a while and figure out what is working for you. And I think you double down on what is working for me. I mean, I feel like we've tried a little bit of everything out there. We've done physical mailers, we've done cold calling, email campaigns, conferences, trade shows. That being said, I have to plug you guys at least a little bit right now, doing a social campaign as well as a newsletter with your firm. And I really feel like that's going well. We're in the early days. There's a lot more work to be done. But I think the aspect of getting out there and really personalizing private equity as opposed to the demonization that sometimes the media tries to portray private equity as. I think that this is the type of thing that could be successful. Again, we're probably preaching to the choir each other here because we have the client relationship, but it's definitely one way that I feel like we can do things differently.
Yeah, we're going to get into the personal branding stuff or the kind of the content and personal stuff a bit later. I was also researching before the companies that you guys have bought in the past. What I was seeing, and maybe I was looking in the wrong places, but like more industrial style companies, like businesses that make real things. Is that like, do you just focus on those kind of things or have they just been good deals for you?
A little bit of both. My background was in industrial engineering. Industrial engineering is about making processes more efficient, largely in a manufacturing setting. Whenever we would talk to business owners, it was usually easiest for us to develop a better relationship with other manufacturing business owners because they respected my background and experience and whatnot. Also, being in the middle of the United States, you really can't walk too far without running into a manufacturing business. So for those two reasons, that's why I would feel like to date, our portfolio is overweight a bit in manufacturing. That being said, as we started to look at businesses outside of manufacturing, what we have found is that a lot of businesses in the size range we target all face similar issues. What I mean by that is there's not only growth that companies experience in terms of revenues, But as you're growing from 20 million of revenues to, let's say, 100 million of revenues, it's not just adding people. You have to add processes and procedures because the complexity of the organization goes far beyond what any one or two people can contain in their own head. It has to be written down. There has to be methods in order to keep track of all the moving pieces and whatnot. And what we found is that a lot of business owners in that 20, 30, $40 million revenue range aren't necessarily the experts at implementing those processes and procedures because they have more of the entrepreneurial flair, the entrepreneurial spirit. And because of that, processes and procedures sometimes feel like red tape and bureaucracy. And Tom, I feel like you're an entrepreneur as well. I have to think that you don't like red tape or bureaucracy. And so it's not something that I like either. But if you want to get to that level, at some point, you have to embrace that. And because of that, we found that a lot of those companies in this size range, whether they're manufacturing, service, whatever, could use some help there. And that's why we feel like if we can just focus on the basic business fundamentals of what it takes to get to that level, we can be successful regardless of industry.
Got it. Because I also wanted to come on to how you guys like to improve the businesses that you take control of. And it seems like what you're saying there's some operational experience and expertise that you guys have that helps these businesses grow larger when you get them.
For sure. However, what I will tell you is that the story is actually a little bit different. Again, I started off in industrial engineering. I worked a lot of projects that were around lean manufacturing, which is about taking costs out of the manufacturing process. Then I went to work for a private equity-backed manufacturer, and it was really a hybrid role. I was doing a little bit of everything. Part of my role was business development. Part of my role was operations. While I was there, did some operations projects that for one specific manufacturing cell, we reduced inventory by, it was 80 to 90%. I mean, amazing, right? Like, you want to just tell me congratulations and say how great of a guy I am? No, I'm just joking. I don't deserve that at all. However, even though that feels cool to say, 80 to 90%, you look at the financial statements, it doesn't show up at all. You can't really even tell unless you really get into very detailed analysis. And even then, it's really clouded because of how small of a piece that was as compared to the overall company. So yeah, that's why there was no ticker tape parades whenever we reduced the inventory like that, because it wasn't showing up on the income statement immediately. However, in the business development role, I was lucky enough to land a client that resulted in maybe a 10 to 15% bump to top line revenue. That showed up on the income statement immediately. Still didn't get the ticker tape parade. Still don't think I deserve one. But again, that was much easier to see very early on. And that changed my perspective on the quickest ways to impact company performance. Used to think it was all through operations, lean manufacturing, getting the costs out. But then I realized if you can be more sophisticated in your sales and marketing approach, you land one big customer account, it's going to blow all those operational improvement projects out of the water, provided the new account is a profitable project and not just revenue for the sake of revenue.
So you're saying that essentially what you guys like to come in and do is revamp the go-to-market approach.
Exactly. So in thinking about the sophistication that some of these businesses have, I would say there's many different areas in which they lack sophistication and can have a more thoughtful, intentional approach to how they do things. However, the function in which most companies that I come across are by far the least sophisticated is sales and marketing. You talk to some companies, what's your sales team look like? Oh, well, we got Joe over there. He's the one that probably talks to the customers the most. He's not really a salesperson, but yeah, he talks to the customers the most. Okay. Have you thought about adding a salesperson? Oh, yeah. If we added a salesperson, we could double this business overnight. Oh, well, that's amazing. If it's so easy to do that, you could just hire one salesperson, you double the business overnight. Why haven't you done it yet? And proverbial crickets is what you hear there. So not trying to imply that implementing a new sales and marketing strategy is easy. Certainly it's not. There's going to be a lot of false starts, a lot of decisions that you wish you would have made differently. However, starting with a formal strategic planning process that we like to do with all our portfolio companies, we at least have the team thinking about the issue the same way. We have the team align on goals and objectives, and we go after those goals and objectives. Hopefully we're successful, but at the very least, we're all rowing in the right direction and we're all trying to achieve the same goal.
So when you say we, how involved are you and your partner in the operations?
Well, it depends on the deal. I will tell you that the first pillar in our name is relationships as a cornerstone for success. As it relates to partnerships, I don't feel like I am building a good relationship if I say to you, Tom, you know what, Tom, I'm going to be in your office every Friday at 9 a.m. We're going to go over everything, whether you like it or not. That's not really how I feel like you build a successful or an effective relationship. It's really getting to know the other people on the team and mutually talking about and deciding how we should be involved in what areas, what the cadence is for meetings and whatnot, because I am definitely one that hates micromanagement, and that would be the last thing that I would ever want to do to any of our portfolio companies. However, a lot of the people that we tend to work best with are of the mindset that, hey, let's get smart people in the room. It's never bad to have more people in the room tossing around ideas and whatnot. We don't want too many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak. So we need to have clear areas of responsibility, assigned objectives and whatnot. But again, as long as we all understand our role and we're all working together, then collaboration from my perspective is usually a good thing.
Do you have any tips for that first, like, a 1 to 3 months of when you take control of the company?
But what I will tell you is that first month, we would typically try to rock the boat as little as possible. We've heard stories where people come in and do something as silly as paint the lobby so that they know that a new sheriff is in town. How ludicrous does that sound? I mean, I think that's about one of the craziest things I've ever heard, but I guess people have done it. So what I would say is during specifically the first few weeks, maybe the first month, we're just trying to make sure people feel like it's business as usual. As you get to months 2 and 3, that's where we are definitely behind the scenes, but absorbing as much as we can. We just want to learn the business. That's when we ask all sorts of stupid questions. Why do you do it this way? Why do you do it that way? Have you ever thought about this? Have you ever thought about that? Again, stupid questions that the folks on the team probably get maybe a little bit annoyed with just because they seem so far out in left field. But we're doing that to educate ourselves so that whenever we start going through the strategic planning process, we have a little bit more perspective as to what's been tried in the past, what conditions were similar now that weren't when we tried this before, or anything along those lines. So in summary, though, as I think about what we try to do during that first 1 to 3 months, I would say it's just learn the business as well as we can without negatively disrupting the business.
And then presumably by the end of month 3, you have like the plan, and then the rest of the time you're implementing the plan.
I would say, I don't know if it happens at the end of month 3 or when exactly it happens, but I would say how I would think about the phases are a period of learning, which would probably be at least a month, maybe 3 months. At the end of that first period is when we would get the team together, go through a formal strategic planning process. At that point, the plan is in place, then we go execute it. So do we do that strategic planning process at the end of month 3? Possibly. Could it be 6 months? Certainly possible as well. It really just depends on the situation.
So let's go back to deal sourcing then. I'm interested at the point in which you decided that it could be an idea to start building like the LinkedIn presence and the email newsletter in order to source deals, because I believe that is the primary objective, right?
Yeah, really, it's an evolution of how we think about ourselves as a private equity firm. Yeah, I've mentioned a couple of times sophistication in general, as well as sophistication in sales and marketing. If I'm going to go into a portfolio company and say, you guys need to be more strategic about your sales and marketing, then I feel like it's I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth if I don't do the same thing myself. So that's definitely one side of it. I want to walk the walk that I'm asking our portfolio companies to do and think strategically and be intentional about our sales and marketing strategy, not just at the portfolio company level, but also at the private equity level. Definitely one component of it. However, there's a little bit more. I talked a little bit about not wanting to be a conventional or traditional private equity firm. If you look at a lot of private equity principles, what I would tell you is that many of the elder statesmen, if you will, pride themselves on the relationships they've built over their 20, 30, maybe even 40-year career in private equity. And I will never discount those. Those relationships are definitely worth a lot. However, they're not repeatable. you can't just pass on those relationships to the younger members in your firm that you would need to do at some point. And also, even as many relationships as you have, can you 10x those relationships, 100x those relationships? Absolutely not. It takes time to build those. And if you're not willing to commit that time day after day, month after month, year after year, then your network, your database and whatnot is not going to grow. As well as I do, scalable growth is what you should be after, at least to some degree. And I can only have so many lunch meetings with people. I can only go to so many trade shows and conferences. It's just not scalable. I wanted to figure out a way so that I could get my personality, let people get to know me, but also just make people aware of I'm out there, 4 Pillars is out there, and needed a better way to do that. And that's why I thought the personal branding with via the social channels as well as the newsletter would be effective to do that.
Makes sense. Essentially, what we're doing is finding people that in the future may want to sell their business. And in the meantime, getting them to know, like, and trust you. So when they do come to that stage, they would be more likely to come to you guys. That's like the theory, right?
Absolutely. I put a little bit differently. I think a lot of times marketing efforts as it relates to business owners is very challenging because traditional methods would rely on you getting in front of that person at just the right time. We're trying to find a way to where we don't have to hit that narrow window. We already have the relationship in place so that we're top of mind whenever it gets to the point where they're wanting to have a discussion about potentially selling their business.
Makes total sense. Just if we have any people listening, it was 20 to 100 million, right? Do they have to be US based? Do they have to have like this in-person presence, or could they be online businesses? Let's just give a shout out to the audience.
For sure. It certainly doesn't have to be in-person businesses. I would say that the bar would be a little bit higher for non-US based businesses, just because I'll just be candid. I'm just much more familiar with the ins and outs of running a business in the US than I am overseas or whatnot. And also, I like to go to the companies, and it's a little bit easier for me to hop in my car and drive to another city in the Midwest than it is to fly to London or somewhere in Italy or France or Germany or wherever the case may be. So the travel time obviously impacts that. But at the end of the day, I would like to think of myself as pretty opportunistic. And also, even if it's not fit for us, then I'm all about building relationships. And I would love to be in a position to help folks, even if we wouldn't be the ideal buyer.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm sure the audience does as well. Thank you, Nick. So we'll link to 4 Pillars. We'll link to your LinkedIn profile and the newsletter. Anything else we should link to or mention?
Well, if you'd like to learn more about private equity, I do have a growing YouTube channel that has a lot of videos on how to sell your business, how to value your business, private equity in general and specific. Might be a good resource for folks that are getting to the point where they'd like to learn more about private equity, like to learn a little bit more about the sale process.
Forgot about the YouTube. Yes, we will link that as well. Nick, thank you so much. It's clear that you, A, are passionate, and B, have a lot of knowledge about this stuff. So thank you so much for coming on.
Well, I can certainly agree that I do have passion. I don't think anybody can argue that. I'll never be one to say that I have all the knowledge, but if you think so, then I won't argue with you.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
Okay, team, what do we think? Would you like me to do more episodes on these finance PE type guests? It's very interesting and I'm learning a lot myself, but obviously I want to ensure that our listeners, our B2B entrepreneurs, also find this useful. I think if you're a B2B entrepreneur, learning about finance is going to be super useful. A, if you ever want to buy or sell a company in the future, or just to learn about things that will improve your business. Often when these people come in, they just do make very simple tweaks, like Nick was saying, hiring a salesperson, and that had a massive impact on the company. Whereas if the owner or the entrepreneur had just done that, they would have had a better business and maybe wouldn't have had to or wanted to sell. So I think it's super valuable. I'll keep doing it for now, but let me know if you do or don't want me to. And you can do that by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or simply by just pinging me a message on LinkedIn. So shout out to Fame for producing the show, and thank you for listening.